Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the AuctionChatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by R Moshe Maimon, and we'll be discussing the Taj Art Auction, the upcoming auction at the time this is being released, which is Auction 11, and it's Sunday, December 24th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We've done this in the past. I think this is our third auction episode, if memory serves, but listeners can correct us if that's wrong, and where we discuss an auction catalog and discuss some of their items that they'll be offering for sale. And we discuss interesting historical tidbits and nuggets, whether it's about this specific lot number, or it's just about the item in general. There's a new edition and things like that. Things that were interesting to us. As with the past episodes, this one is sponsored by the auction house. I'll say that up front. It's sponsored by Taj Art Auction House, and I thank them for the sponsorship. But there's a lot of interesting information. But at the beginning, I will say their link will be in the show's notes. If you're on the WhatsApp chat, the link will be there. On Twitter, the link will be there. Please sign up. Please, go to bid. There's a lot of items they're on the, wouldn't say cheap, but on the lower end to the very expensive. And even if you're not looking to buy, you're not a collector, or it's just very expensive, I would still urge you to go look. There are many fascinating items. It's a really wonderful auction. And as we'll get into, hopefully this podcast will be interesting and enjoyable. I've gotten good feedback on the other ones, so hopefully this is the same thing. So thank you, R Moshe, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Nachi. What a pleasure to be here. Baruch Hashem, the auction industry is alive and well, and that is great news for Svarim lovers, history lovers, Jewish rabbinic lovers, because it's the sustained interest in these auction houses that that give value to these artifacts. People cherish them, people talk about them, and we are all enriched by the process. So Baruch Hashem for that. And again, it's a tremendous pleasure to be with your audience, Nachi, talking about the things we love. We love to talk about the Svarim, we love to talk about the history, and we hope that the readers find this enriching. It is a very rich catalog with a lot of interesting artifacts, some that we've covered in the past and some new ones as well, which we will talk about.
Yeah, and so I think we'll do like what we did in the past. We'll mention the specific lot number and the item that we're discussing. In the show's notes, the ones that we went into in depth, I'll try to link individually, but again, there'll be a link to the catalog. And we're going to go in order of the catalog and stopping by the ones that we have what to say and we found interesting personally. Doesn't mean the other ones are not interesting. Some of them are really fascinating. And maybe briefly mention, I'm not going to mention every item. There's 210 lots, but maybe we'll mention some of the items that are of interest, even some that we don't have much to say on. So I think there's some interesting items to start off. The lot 4 is a Sifsei Das, which is not so well known. It's one of the Svarim of the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar is much more well known. Actually, there's a new edition of Sifsei Das. There's Ishbal Leket, and that's a little. There's some other books there. But I think the first lot that really jumped out at us when we started preparing this for this episode, I think Thursday night when we started preparing for this, is Mein Ganem, Venice, 1553. This is lot 9. It's a miniature, which is a small book. And this is a book written by Shmuel Archiavolti. He was very involved in the printing press in Italy. He was an editor for, I think, the Barbanel and some other things. He also has a book, Arugas Havaisim on Diktuk, but this book is teaching how to compose letters. And it's a very interesting book. And R Moshe, I know you looked into this.
I had heard about this a while ago. I'm sure many of your listeners will recognize the name as well, because this featured very prominently in the greater picture of Baruch Epstein and his Mekar Baruch. It's a really fascinating episode, and the rarity of this item was actually featured as well in that whole story, in that whole episode. So just to give the listeners a refresher, and maybe if you didn't hear about it, it's worth looking into. This sefer is it's called Igrois Chachma, he calls it, letters, and like you said, it was meant to teach readers how the art of writing in prose, and writing to different people, writing to your Rebbe, writing to your parents, writing to your spouse, writing to your beloved. There's a section there which includes love letters, the 5th section of the book. So it's really it's a quite a unique kind of sefer book, call it what you will. It doesn't belong to a very large genre of Svarim, but this eluded many people who only heard about it, did not actually see it in print, which owing to the rarity, well, I don't know that it was ever printed again after the original print here in the 1500s. But this sefer comes up in the discussion of Reb Baruch Epstein with his aunt in the Makar Baruch, and in a somewhat altered form in My Uncle the Netziv. There's a chapter there where Reb Baruch talks about his conversations that he had with his aunt, the Netziv's wife. Reb Baruch, the son of the Aruch HaShulchan, is the nephew of the Netziv. And as a nephew of the Netziv, he's a ben bayis by the Netziv, and he gets to know his aunt, the Netziv's wife, who is the daughter of Reb Itzel Volozhiner. So in the Makar Baruch version, and the Hebrew version, it's obviously, there's much more information there. There we learn that this aunt was an intellectual, a frustrated one at that, because women did not have too much opportunity for learning and pursuing their intellectual interests. But this, she was the daughter, obviously, of from the greatest Chacham Melita, and the husband and the wife of the Netziv. So she had a lot of opportunity to be around Sfarim and around Rabbanim and around Talmidei Chachamim, but she felt frustrated that she didn't have even more of an opportunity to explore Chachmas HaTorah. And Reb Baruch says, perhaps because of her intellectual interests, she was not much of a homemaker. And he extols the Netziv's virtue, and the Netziv suffered that very tolerantly. Sometimes there weren't meals on the table, but he was fine with that. That's because Reina Batya, as she's now known, Baruch Epstein's aunt, and it's his wife, would often be studying or learning instead of doing some of her household chores. At any rate, the theme that she would often take up with Reb Baruch Epstein in their recorded conversations, as presented by Reb Baruch in the Makar Baruch, always revolved around the topic of great women in Jewish history and the opportunities. Does Jewish history, does the Jewish rabbinic tradition afford women the opportunity for learning? Does it look favorably on such learning? Does it extol the few women who did achieve greatness in Torah learning? She was always maintaining that it does, and Reb Baruch Epstein was always sounding playing devil's advocate, much to the consternation of his aunt. And they would argue vociferously, as recorded in the Makar Baruch. Sometimes there'd be a period of silence. She was so upset with him, she couldn't continue talking with him. But at any rate, these conversations show what a special woman she was, and what unique kind of conversation Reb Baruch Epstein enjoyed with her. At one point in the discussion, Reb Baruch Epstein reports, she pulls out a little sefer that she found called Mayan Ganim from, he mispronounces the last name, but it's this Mayan Ganim from Reb Shmuel Arkivolti, and she shows him that Reb Shmuel writes there that perhaps you can say that when the Chachamim talk about when they dissuade a father from teaching his daughter Torah, that's only it's in limited circumstances, but in other circumstances it would be permitted, and he shows leniency in that regard. So she feels triumphant when she shows it to Reb Baruch Epstein. Reb Baruch Epstein dismisses it with saying, "Nah, that's Reb Shmuel Arkivolti. We don't know if he was a halachist. We don't know if he has enough halachic weight to actually sway the normative halacha." So he dismisses it, and again, she's very upset about it. This is the story as he tells it. But later research has shown that he didn't actually see the sefer inside. One of the reasons is because he calls the sefer like a sefer of halacha, and it's clearly anything but a sefer of halacha. Furthermore, in the Torah Tamima written by Reb Baruch Epstein before the Makar Baruch, he has this exact back and forth on his own, where he's talking about women learning Torah, and he's in Dvarim Perek Aleph, and he cites this sefer, which he calls a Shilos Achuvas Mayan Ganim, from this Italian sage, and there himself he brings it up as a proof, but dismisses it. Perhaps it's not true because it's not. Perhaps it's not true from a halachic perspective because Reb Shmuel Arkivolti is only a medaktik. He's not necessarily Talmud Chacham. Here in the notes in the catalog, by the way, it calls him a Rosh Hashiva, so it's likely that he was a Talmud Chacham. But at any rate, this very discussion that Reb Baruch reports, having had with his aunt, shows up in his own sefer anonymously, which is a theme I found myself in as an aside. I found that in Reb Baruch Epstein, that sometimes some of the conversations he records, he writes in other writings, not in conversation form, but he'll bring up a makar and he'll dismiss it. One example I pointed out to in the past was where he talks about Reb Chaim Volozhiner's Vart, with David HaMelech asking that the Tehillim should be like an Goyim and Oyelis, and Chaim Volozhin said, well, we don't know what he said. So he has this as a back and forth, but in his own writings, it's not a conversation, it's his own Chiddush. So he had such a tendency. In other words, giving people the suspicion that he would, his own ruminations and his own back and forth and some of his own information, he'd plant in the mouths of his conversants in his fanciful retellings. That's the suspicion here. Mark Shapiro points out that this same discussion that he has in Torah Tamima, and he reports in the name of his discussions with Reina Batya, his aunt, also shows up in another place in his letters to Reb Chaim Hershenson. So it was a favorite theme of his, and in all these cases, he always slightly misquotes the Sefer, the Mayan Gami, which he's purporting to quote from, which led Munshine, the Chabad scholar, to discover that he never saw the Sefer himself. It was a very rare Sefer. For sure, he never saw it, and he was a bibliophile. Kal v'chomer, his aunt Reina Batya never saw it. In Volozhin, it was a rare Sefer, but he did see he saw it cited in the Tzefira, one of the periodicals in 1896, long after his stay in Volozhin, long after Reina Batya had passed on. So he had reconstructed this whole episode based on something he had seen in a newspaper. So it's quite it was somewhat of a very famous citation in by Baruch Epstein. It was there's articles about it from Don Seaman and Dan Rabinowitz and like Mark Shapiro and again Munshine. So this is quite an exciting episode.
I will also mention that the Sefer has a picture in there that really is, I'm not sure how to describe the picture, so I'm not going to describe it. I will just say, do yourself a favor and look at the picture. It's one of those old Renaissance Italy pictures. Think of the statue of David, Michelangelo's famous statue in Florence. But look at the picture. I'll put a link. And Rishul Arkivolti was a Talmid Chacham, I believe, and there's a full bio of him in one of the volumes of Asufot, Meir Ben Yoel's journal Yad Rav Nisim. And he wrote, like I said, Arugas Abayis Madiktuk, and he was involved with many different things. So this is a very interesting, fascinating item. The auction house says that it's rare. No reason to doubt it. I didn't really double check. And it's really a wonderful Sefer. So to mention that one. That's lot 9. Lot 10 is Noy Katan Yosef. It's a unique copy. That's the Sefer of Menhagim, Halachas of Frankfurt. Interesting Sefer. But lot 11 is one which we'll turn to next. And it's interesting because here in the description it's called a rare polemical book against the Kabbalah, Eitz Hadat, with several annotations by the author in the margins, Venice, 1704. It's not exactly a book polemic against Kabbalah, even though that's part of it, as we'll get into here. I actually own a copy of this, which thanks to Jack Jamal, Jewish Bookery, and this is a commentary on Bechinas Olam for Bidaya Bedirsi, and it was written anonymously, but it is written by the great Italian Paisik Reb Shimshon Morpurgu, not so well known. He has this is his book. It hasn't been redone, and his other book is Shemesh Tzedakah, book of Chuvas that he wrote, also hasn't been redone. There's a couple of famous Chuvas in there, notably one about Tefillin and Chalamoid. He got into a back and forth with the Ramenu Chayriki, the big Mekubal Mishas Chasidim, and I'll mention Rabbi Dr. David Katz on his podcast did an episode on Rav Shimshon Morpurgu, worth listening to if you want to hear more about him. So he prints this volume anonymously when he was young, I think 23 years old. And in the back, he includes a poem from Francis. I think they're the Francis brothers, Yaakov and Jacob and Emmanuel, And this is kind of where things become heated. Later on with Rabbi Aviad Sar Shalom Basilia. For those that aren't familiar, he authors the book called Emunas Chachamim. That's a work where he denigrates philosophy, he defends, upholds Kabbalah. It's kind of in the genre of the pushing back against those who attack the authenticity of the Zohar and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and just attack Kabbalah generally. And he was a big gadol in Italy also at the same time period, 18th century. And there's what to discuss on him. That there actually is a new edition of Emunas Chachamim from Zichron Aaron with the notes. Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote notes in his Matpachas Farim on the bottom, and they put that on the bottom. Part of it was notes on Emunas Chachamim. Anyways, with all that intro, Ramesh, I'll turn it over to you. And that's, by the way, this is again lot 11, and there are some in the margins, some notations from the author, and it's a very interesting item as we'll discuss more here.
I learned about this item first, from the aforementioned Emunas Chachamim. I was curious to learn who is the target of his ire, because the Emunas Chachamim throughout the Sefer, 4 or 5 different places, he mentions this newly released Sefer. The Eitz Hadas was published in 1704. The Emunas Chachamim, I think, is published in 1730 thereabouts, and he still refers to a recently released Sefer by an unknown scholar. He claims not to know who it is, but he's very, very perturbed by this author, because although he concedes, it's clear that the author is a Talmud Chacham. And again, important. This was published in 1704 when Reb Shimshon Porgo was only 23 years old, very young man, but quite accomplished already at the time, and he was already a rabbi and a scholar. And when he publishes the Sefer, he does it without putting his name in there. And therefore, the Emunas Chacham says, I don't know who it is. It doesn't say who it is, but he's very, very opposed to certain positions in the Sefer, in the Hakdama, where he takes a very lukewarm approach to the Kabbalah, and more so for the letter in the back from Yaakov Francis. Yaakov Francis is one of the famous 2 Francis brothers. They lived during the height of the Shabtai Tzvi saga, and they wrote a series of very famous letters where they both were made a mockery of Shabtai Tzvi. So these were the two brothers who were able to laugh while everybody else was totally caught up in the frenzy of Shabtai Tzvi. They were able to stand apart, see it for what it was, and scoff and mock it. With the one brother, Yaakov Francis, also opposed in general to Kabbalah, and he had a song which is, it shows a very skeptic approach to believing in the authenticity of Kabbalah. And this is the song, this shir, this prose is what Reb Shimshon Porgo appends to the end of the Sefer, and that is an unforgivable sin in the eyes of Rabbi Aviad Sar Shalom Basila and his Emunas Chachamim, because he is defending the authenticity of the Kabbalah tradition in this Sefer. This Sefer has to be understood, really both Svarim in a sense have to be understood against the inner Jewish intellectual battleground being fought then in Italy for Kabbalah. Italy, the Jews of Italy were much more modern than we understand from Eastern European Jews, even to an extent more than Western European Jews. They had the Renaissance there, and they were very exposed to culture and the different religions and secular writings, etc., etc. But the Kabbalah does make great inroads there, starting from Ramami Pano and even earlier to some extent with the Rekanati, and we'll talk about him. We'll mention a sefer of his being featured in this auction. But slowly but surely, by the time of the 1700s, it's a full-out war with the pros and the cons. There are those among the Rabbanim who are very, very pro. Rav Moshe Zakut is a very big proponent of Kabbalah. And then there are those more of the rational bent that are not so favorable towards Kabbalah. And that's why we see a flourishing of Sfarim, pro and con. In this era, we have we're going to get it further down the list. There's a Shomer Emunim from Rabbi Yosef Irgas, written the Rabbi of Livorno. It also came out around 1730, around the same time as the Emunas Chachamim is coming out. And these are Sfarim that are pro Kabbalah. So Rabbi Viad in his Emunas Chachamim targets the anonymous author of Eitz Hadas for his anti-Kabbalah stand. Now, Nachi, you already alluded to this. It's not really an anti-Kabbalah sefer. It's a commentary on Bechinas Olam. Bechinas Olam is rationalistic in that it's Rabbi Daya's Peninim, it's his Musrim, it's given with a rationalist bent, but it's not in any way anti-Kabbalah. But again, the rationalism and the few comments here and there, and especially including the letter, that convinced Rabbi Viad that this is from an anti-Kabbalah author, and that's why he targets him. The tremendous irony here is that these two Chachamim belong to the same exact circle. One of the main Mekubalim that Rabbi Viad quotes in his sefer is Rabbi Yosef Piameta. Rabbi Yosef Piameta is the father-in-law of Rabbi Shimshon Porgo. So together they both learn in the yeshiva of Yehuda Briel. They're you might even think of them as classmates. I don't believe that Rabbi Viad knows who he is targeting. He says it was published anonymously. David Ruderman has argued that he does, and he just presents it as anonymous sefer out of respect for his friend. I don't know. David Ruderman's article is in the Jerusalem volume of Studies in Jewish Thought. Very, very interesting article where he discusses this exact polemic. And his conclusion over there is actually that even though they actually belong to the same group and they have similar opinions even Rabbi Shimon Porgo is not a major Aristotelian. He's also an anti-philosophy to some extent. The question is just what's the better foot to put forward for the general public? One which is more pro-Kabbalah, or one which is more pro-rationalism, even though it's really, in a sense, Mashmoy's Darshan Ika Beinayu. It's a very good article, very good study. I recommend it. You'll also learn there about the sad, it's a tragic comedy, what befell poor Rabbi Viad Tzar Shalom, Basil, the author of Emunas Chachamim. He had a habit of visiting the prison in Mantua every Friday. And during one of his visits, as he's leaving, he's bending over to put some charity in the alms box. And some hooligan paints a cross on his derriere. And when he gets up and he's leaving, he becomes a mockery, and the people in the towns, people are scoffing him. He says, if you take note of where the cross is, you won't be laughing. And that really angered the government. They couldn't take a joke, and the Christian authorities had him in prison for a year, and then he was in house arrest, and then he was confined to the ghetto almost at the end of his life. So it really turned into a big tragedy for Rabbi Viad. But again, he's one of the great chachamim of his era, as is Rabbi Shimon Porgo. And this volume, Eitz Hadas, really makes for a fascinating historical study of the personalities of that episode.
Yeah, and one more thing, in Rabbi Shimon Porgo, there's a bunch of famous shuvas in Shemesh Tzedakah, and also he was of, like Rav Moshe said, the rationalistic bent. He was part of the school of Italy. You had the Rabbanim that were kind of the doctors, the physicians. They went to the university in Padua, and then they were clean shaven. I think there's a picture of him, I think, somewhere that he is. And then you also had the Mekubalim, like his father-in-law, and you had the other ones like Rav Yezar Shalom that were big Mekubalim. So it was kind of the two kind of Rabbanim.
Sometimes even these Mekubalim were clean shaven. And when we see pictures of them, it also takes us by surprise. But that was kind of normal back then.
And we know the Ramchal, and another part of Shimon Porgo that I was going to say is he was very involved in the Ramchal controversy. Rav Moshe Chagiz, who I'm going to get to in a second, or Chagiz, but I'll call him Chagiz. There's letters between him and Rav Shimon Porgo. He's writing about the Ramchal, and these were printed. They were published by the scholar Isaiah Zana. He published them. You can print it off, even like Hebrew books. And so that is what there is. And there's a lot more to say on Rav Shimon Porgo, but again, this is his work. Eitz Hadas, it's really nice. And by the way, I can tell you from the copy, I have a copy. It's beautiful. It's wide margins. It's really nice, easy to read. He actually puts the sources in the bottom. It's almost like you're using a just contemporary printed book of footnotes, like Mossad Rav Kook. It's really nice with the sources. I'm not always going to mention prices because things go up and down, but I can mention at least starting prices. The start price in this is $500, and this is also for anyone that knows auctions. There's commission and then there's shipping and things like that. But $500, and there is no bid as of now. It is a very nice item, very very interesting and unique item. So, Moshe, you wanted to add something?
I think it's more important to point out that those letters also demonstrate, the letters to Rav Moshe Chagiz demonstrate an important facet of Rav Shimon Porgo's personality. He's not a radical anti-Kabbalist like maybe some would have you believe. And therefore, we have in these letters, you see him kind of trying to temper Rav Moshe Chagiz's kanois. Rav Moshe Chagiz is all out waging war to expose the Ramchal, for his Sabbateanism and his loose cannon Kabbalism, but Rav Shimon Porgo is preaching for restraint and really trying to quiet down the frenzy. So very very level-headed, very responsible, very rational, very even-keeled, very well-balanced, tremendous halachic authority that he was.
Okay, so the next item that is Lot 12, and Lot 12 is really a fascinating item that I came across a few years ago when there was a new edition published of it 3 years ago. And, I mentioned this to the auction house when I was emailing them, that I said, I don't think their description does it justice. And maybe they'll amend it after this podcast, because this is a really fascinating item. And right now it has a bid of $400. But to me, again, I don't know. I didn't research what it's going for, but it's fascinating and I want to talk about it. So it's Divrei Zikaron, printed in 1705. It's a beautiful copy, has the original leather binding, and there's a dedication to a groom. There's a stamp from Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Amsterdam where it was printed, and it said it was decommissioned from the library. But let's talk about the book. So what is it? The Divrei Zikaron was written by Rabbi Yosef Stadthagen. It's a city in Germany, and it's on Shulchan Aruch, Yeridei Hilcha Shchita Ubedika, so shechting an animal, But it's not a commentary on Shulchan Aruch. He says it is. It is it's divrei musar, essentially, as he says on the cover. V'haya lechem lezikaron sefer divrei zikaron b'derech chayim techachas musar. On what? On shchito b'dika. Now, how does someone do something like that? So, to point out what the sefer does, just to give you an example, Siman Yud Aleph. So we bring Shulchan Aruch, Siman Aleph Siv Ches. Shikr, a drunk, she'agil l'shakrusei shaloit, dina keshaita. Someone that's very drunk like light, he's the din of a shaita. V'im lo yagil l'shakrusei shaloit, if he's not as drunk as light, shreichet l'chatchila. Then he could shech, no problem. Haggah, the Ramah says, v'yesh oimrim, she'shikr lo yeshchait, she'roga lovi l'idei dirsa. Ramah says a shikr should not do shchita. What does the Beis Hashtat Hagen say? Shikr eni yachal liyas tzaddik gomer. Heichachti, I prove shikr eni yachal liyas tzaddik gomer. He's a begitten, and he goes off on gittin, and then the new edition has there's commentary and it's broken up. It's beautiful. It's done really nice. And he says Hadorshim is noyach liganayim b'meisha shtarker. He starts talking about noyach, and noyach got drunk, and he goes off and he starts talking about all different things. And this is how the sefer is set up, but it's on Shulchan Aruch. It's almost like he's riffing off of Shulchan Aruch. But this is how it's done. So the new edition only did shchita, but there's also bedika as well. And I can get just one more example. Maybe it's worth mentioning from the Sefer and the Shulchan Aruch Siman Yud Sif Gimel. Sakin sheshachat batreifa, a knife that shecht the treifa. Aser lishchit, but you can't shecht with it. It's aser ad she'edechenu b'tzaynein, or you kichenu b'davar kasha. You have to clean it off essentially. What does he say? Tikkun l'davar kasha. Then he goes into Beis Hashtat Hagen, into how do you fix a davar kasha? And he starts going off on all different things. And then he says, and how do I see this in din shchita? And he starts telling you how this is how I see all this in shchita, and he goes on and it, and it's a big work. So what's interesting about this, all of this is that, and he has a haskama from the Smichas Chachamim, Rav Naftali Akayin Katz. And what's interesting is I didn't check the dates. I meant to. Rav Naftali says in his haskama that I don't give haskamas. He says, but this, I'll read it. He says, I don't really give haskamas. But over here, he says, I don't. Vim amnam. However, ein zeh darki litin haskamas al svarim lehatfisam ki asay svarim harbe ein kates, many svarim. Amnam kein yotzasi chus migdari. I went out lechovin she'eri hanal. So it sounds like he's a Rav Hanal. It sounds like he's related. Umagam, and also Shasefer Shechiber Kanal Rubai Kikulo Yira Shemayim. It's mostly Yira Shemayim. The Chol Magamoisev Hu Zakis as a Rabbim. The Chen Lo Manati Asmin Lahaskim Kanal. So he wanted to give Haskama. I'll just mention historical tidbit. This is printed 1705. Rav Naftali Akayin Katz Smichas Chamim does get involved in the Nechem Yechiyun issue, and he does give a Haskama there, and he has to retract it, and there's a whole controversy. But I think it came up in the Shabtai Tzvi series. So I didn't check the dates. I meant to. But that's just an interesting aside. Now, getting back to this Beis Hashtat Hagen, the R Moshe Chagiz has a beautiful work called Mishnas Chachamim. And in Mishnas Chachamim, where he talks about the Memchas Dvarim Shatar Nikaspan, but he only has 24. He never finished the Sefer. He says this is note or Ois Reish Nun, where he says like this. Zachar la toiva, should remember it for good, v'al tishchach, and don't forget, milumid b'sefer divrei zikaron. Shechiber, to learn in sefer divrei zikaron. Shechiber, who was written by Echad miyuchid, merabone go'ine Ashkenaz, one miyuchid, the special one essentially of the Rabbanim of Ashkenaz, mushlam b'chol mayla toiva, he's complete with all greatness, al toiv yizkar shemoy, his name shall be remembered, harav hagadol, hagoin, Yisrael, Harav Hagadol Goin Yisrael, Marav Harav Rabbeinu Yosef Shtat Hagen Zecher Tzadich v'Kodesh L'Vracha. The Bechachma v'Das, with Chachma and Das, Dorash v'Chokar, he went and he Drishim v'Chakira v'Asa Simuchim Doiraisa. He did Smuchim, because it's not, I guess he's saying that because it's not on Hilchos Shchita B'dika. Bechibur Na v'Ya Lehasmich, to go on. Kol Divrei Hayira v'Hamusar B'Tshuva Me'alya, and proper tshuva al kol dine shchitu bedika, on all the dinim shchitu bedika. Ukeish gvurasai loy haniach davar katan v'gadol mimumei hadar, from the issues of the dar shaloy hachiach b'mishar est inoy haaretz hachafetzim l'shmoya as dvar Hashem. Zochra loy l'toiv, he should remember for good. Ulechasnoi, nisan-lo ha-toirani, hanale, ha-katzin, ahuvenu, kerav harav rabbeinu Yeshua chalfan me'uben neiroi, asher zocha v'zika es harabim, ve'ezer lo-hoitzi sefer zel ha'ira. So he's talking about the son-in-law that prints the book. Ulefikach, and therefore, zocha lebanim b'nei Torah, he was therefore zocha to have children. B'nei Torah hanechemodim mizov u'mipazrov. Shem ha'echad marav Marie Leib neiroi mikal kodesh Prague. Asher kol liboy lashamayim, v'lei pasik girsa mipume. He didn't stop learning. K'moishe idu li kama v'kama anshe emes shebo mehasam lahacha. Many people that came from Prague to hear told me. And R Moshe Chagiz is in Ahu, I think it's Altenhammer Wansbeck. He's in Germany, not so far from Prague. V'chazoysav moichiach alav deshalach liadi kama kontresimi ksavya dechidish b'yeridea the Rav and hein l'smicha. The Shem Hasheni, in the second one, Habacher Havasik v'Chorev Karav Rabbeinu Yitzchak Nerei, the Domi l'Shafara, the Nafik be'Idon Safra, Ukesheshana the Kama Pritzta the Maya, the Im Yasmin v'Limudoi, Ilan Rav Yisav. Be a great, Ilan. The Schus Avos Yamid Lahem, and the Schus Avos should be for them, Ki be'emes, Hagoin Avi Imam Zal, their grandfather, who's again the Beis Shtadhagen, who we're talking about, Haya Echon me'amudei ha'olam, he's the one who held up the world, Kenira mi sefer hatohar, from his holy sefer, shehi male chachma v'yira ubekias, l'mi sheyasim eini hashkachase alav ein aroich alav. Now, again, just to remind the listeners, if they aren't familiar, this is R Moshe Chagiz talking. This is one of the, one of the heresy hunters of the 18th century. He's
hypercritical.
He's Yaakov Emden, he goes after many people. And here he's writing about the Beis Shtadhagen, this Divrei Zikaron. I mean, really beautiful. I mean, this is, I don't know, I'm not familiar if he writes like this about other people. It seems like he must have known him or he knows the family. And he's clearly familiar with the Sefer, and he says you should learn it. And again, it's really, this copy also that they have here at the auction, again, has the original binding. It's beautiful, looks really, from the pictures, just absolutely fabulous. And it's really wonderful. And I've looked at little bits and pieces of it since I got the new one, which came out. And it's really, it's just a unique Sefer. The Torah Barekes is like a Kabbalistic commentary on Samach Shulchan Aruch, but this is like a Musa Sefer on Hilchos Shchita Ubedika. And again, the leading bid right now on lot 12 as of this podcast is $400. I would assume there should be more than $400, but just because of the uniqueness of the item. And then for the listeners, again, there's also the new one, which I highly recommend. I can't imagine it sold very well. People probably had no idea what it is. I know a lot of Sfarim lovers, and they have no idea what the Sefer is. So I just wanted to mention all of that because it's something that jumped out to me.
I'll add that the halachic world has changed somewhat. The halachic landscape has changed. While in the 1700s, even the 1800s, Hilchos Shchita was something that every Rav was very familiar with. And besides the Rav, every Sheikhet, every town needed a Sheikhet. The Sheikhtim were very familiar with this. The Hilchos Shchita's, manuals that come down those are very well thumbed. They're very well used. That was an extremely popular sefer. Maybe like something similar to the Mishnah Brura is today on some level. Maybe not to the the same numbers studying it, but it was such a staple for those who were involved in halacha, because every town needed the sheikh again and the rav. So these halachas were much more prominent than today, where there's somewhat of like a specialized field. Many rabbanim don't deal with practical hilchos shchita questions very often. The sheikhets themselves, that you don't have them as being part and parcel of the community. So at the time this was written, these halachas were very well known, very well thumbed. People who had already memorized, they committed, the Shulchan Aruch to memory in these halachas, they would they would appreciate this clever chap of putting a beautiful Musar Sefer right on the halachas that they were so familiar with anyway.
One more thing about Beis Shtadhagen. So in the introduction to the new one, he says, Chokre Hadoros, and he doesn't say who they are. Chokrim, historians. Mitzaynim Shahil Rabbeinu Machaber said he's Oid Shnei Banim, Reb Mendel, Reb Ephraim, Shesker of Ezer Hanover, lived in Hanover. Basnoi Sefes Rabbeinu Machaber, a daughter, Harehu Eshes, was the wife of Reb Yosef Halevi ben Reb Chaim Halevi Mehamel, Umoras Glickl Melin. So he's saying that he was mechutin with Glickl of Hamlin, who's known for her memoir. Now, I don't know. I tried finding this out. I'm not sure, but that's what it says here.
Glickl does quote many Musar Sforim, but this I don't believe is one of them.
Yeah, and I couldn't find it. Anyways, That is this Sefer. It's lot 12. Just a fascinating item. Unique, fascinating, and this looks like a beautiful copy again. So that is lot 12. Then there's, jumping around. There's some very early editions, 1538 Torah R, a 1523 Srar Amar of Avram Saba, which is the Avram Saba, the Srar Amar, the classic commentary on Torah. This is the first edition. Beautiful, but it's tall. It's a beautiful edition. There's an earlier edition of Vedas HaKodesh, an early Shari Dura. I mean, there's a lot of really early 1541 Tor. There's like some really beautiful early things. An early Alshich on Keheles. That's lot 20. And then lot 21 is Heichal HaKodesh, which is authored, as they write here, by R Moshe Maimon, referred to as Elbaz. So as R Moshe, no relation, I guess. He's a Moroccan. Lot 22, we did not have time to get into. I would have liked to research this. But I'll read you the description. It's a historical book called Pachad Yitzchak, on the history of Italian Jewry, Amsterdam, 1685. And it talks about the community being saved from the Austrian-Turkish War in 1684 in Padua. It's written by Reb Yitzchak Chaim HaKohen Me'achazanim. You can read the description here of lot 22. Right now is a leading bid of $5,500, so not cheap, but it looks like a fascinating item, and I'll have to get back at it a little bit more. Then there are a number of other items continuing down. So lot 23, and I didn't see that they mentioned this here. Moshe, you want to maybe talk about this. Lot 23 is Chesed LaAvram, Amsterdam, 1685. It's the Rabbi Avram Azulai, who is the grandfather.
He's the great-great-grandfather of the Chida.
Great-grandfather of the Chida. And there's a backstory here that they just talk about. Interesting Kabbalah includes Kabbalistic illustrations, and they talk a little bit about it, but they miss one of the parts of the history of this book.
This book is it's a fascinating sefer. It's the history of Rabbi Avram Azulai, which could be expanded upon. He was again the great-grandfather of Chida. The Chida always refers to him as Maurice Kaney. He's the head of the founder of the Azulai line. He came from Morocco to Eretz Yisrael and quickly ingratiated himself to the leading Chachamim there. He became himself one of the leading Chachamim there, but he was very, very influential in the transmission of the Kabbalah because he, together with some of his Chaverim, they underwent the process of Kedusha Tara and Shvuos, and they dug out some of the Reb Chaim Vital's Ksavim that had been buried, and they came out with they were able to uncover another version of part of Chaim Vital's Eitz Chaim, another Mahadura, which had been buried, but on Chaim Vital's on his will and testament, they had buried it with him after he died. But together they were able to uncover it. He was, I think, Rabbi Avram was a Talmud of Reb Chaim Vital's students. Maybe he had some connection with Reb Chaim Vital, I don't recall. But he definitely is a seminal figure in the transmission of the Kabbalah. And this Sefer Chesed Avram is considered one of the fundamental Sifrei Kabbalah of its time. So he's a really important person, and this is a really, really important Sefer. And it's the first print, a beautiful print. There is another first print from another print from this year, but this is the first print, and it's a beautiful, beautiful edition, really from the Sifrei Yesod.
Lot 26, jumping ahead, and again, we're jumping around. In some of these books, some of the lots I'm just mentioning a one-liner, but again, you can check through the catalog. Lot 26 is Shem Emunim, which we mentioned, which is Amsterdam 1736. This is the classical work by Rabbi Yosef Irgas. I know this is one of the works that Yaakov Hillel says this is, if you want to start learning Kabbalah, this is what you should learn. There's actually an English translation now by Avinoam Frankel with it's a massive book. I mean, it has introduction to Kabbalah, and it's a full translation. He's got notes in the back and many other things. It's massive, but it was redone also by Avat Shalom, and it's a debate between Shaltiel and Yehudia, and they're talking about Kabbalah back and forth. This one, the copy they have here, as a really nice atikla, the binding with clasps. I don't know if listeners have ever seen like clasps on a book where you actually metal clasp, you can close the book. Here's what it has. Rav Moshe mentioned this to me, I think today, so we haven't had a chance to look into it. Rabbi Yosef Irgas was the Rav in Livorno, which is a hub of printing activity, and he also his family was rich. They were one of the rich families in Livorno, yet this book is printed in Amsterdam, not in Livorno. I don't know if that had to do with, maybe it has to do with the press at the time. Livorno wasn't yet an established printing center, came a little later. I'm not sure, but that's where the book is printed, and this is really a classic.
It's an absolute classic. I mentioned earlier that this Sefer fits a certain genre, which is flowering at this time in Italy, where you have bikuchim on Kabbalah. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, in his edition, he does tout it as an essential sefer for anyone initiating the limud of Kabbalah, the Kabbalah of the Arizal in particular. He does downplay the first half of the sefer, but the first half of the sefer is this debate between Shaltiel and Yehoyada, like you said, but it's a debate about the provenance of Kabbalah itself, which was, again, like in Italy at the time, that was a burning question. That was a very hotly debated topic, and at the time, this sefer was a very important salvo fired by the pro-Kabbalah side, and this it was very influential, and it follows maybe readers know about the Vikuach of Shadal on Al Chachmas HaKabbalah. It follows a very similar pattern. Obviously, this finding in favor of Kabbalah. For example, the question like, if the Rambam didn't have Kabbalah, so then how could Kabbalah be a part of the canon? And so the answer is that all the other Chacham that did have it outweigh the Rambam that didn't. So whereas Shadal may put for his purposes, he'll say that the fact that Rambam didn't have it is decisive, but the Rabbi Yosef Irgas comes out that it's that of course Kabbalah we find hints at it in the Gaon. I mean, it goes through all the classic, the back and forth, following very similar pattern, but again staunchly in favor of Kabbalah and anti-rationalism, anti-Aristotelianism, anti-philosophy, and that's pretty much the first half of the sefer, which Rabbi Yaakov really downplays because today it's a moot point. You don't even need to fight that battle. But the second half of the sefer, this vikuach, now that Shaltiel is convinced about Kabbalah, he now wants to understand how it works, and that's where Rabbi Yosef Irgas uses this sefer as a platform to delve into Kabbalah. And one of the important contributions that he makes is he says that the Arizal's Kabbalah is not for beginners, and the Arizal skips some of the basics because he assumes that his Talmidim who recorded his teachings knew that already. But he is filling in the missing part based on works of other Kabbalah that existed at the time. He makes them all conform, and he explains how you cannot approach the Arizal's Kabbalah without first mastering the essentials. You're going to have the total wrong understanding of the Arizal's Kabbalah. And Rabbi Yaakov Hillel says that is the case, and therefore he comes out very strongly that someone has to learn. Someone has to go through, in order to get to that Arizal story, you have to go through Shemer Emunim. He does mention, though, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, in his introduction, that there were Hasidic Rebbes that were not such fans of the Sefer Shemer Emunim, because at the very end of Shemer Emunim, he does talk about his opinion of Hashgacha Pratis. And in that discussion, he talks about, besides for the human race, the rest of the creation doesn't have Hashgacha Pratis. It's a Klal Yisrael Hashgacha on the min. It's a stand which you would recognize from the Rambam and the Ramban and other Rishonim who talk about how every particular blade of grass doesn't necessarily have Hashgacha Pratis. There's a Hashgacha. There should be grass in the world. That's Hashgacha Klalis, as the Rishonim call it. And Rabbi Yosef Irgas does subscribe to that view. However, the Baal Shem Tov is famous for his there's the famous story that became a very beautiful song about how the tzaddik found the leaf on the ground, and he picks it up and he sees the worm underneath, and then he understands the whole hashgacha pratis that this leaf should fall down particularly over here to give the worm some shade from the sun, and how every single blade of grass is dictated by a specific hashgacha pratis. So that is the Hasidic viewpoint. And for this reason, some Hasidic Rebbes, he doesn't mention them by name, he says they looked askance at this whole sefer. But Rabbi Yaakov Hillel says, trust me, don't worry, I made it all work out. Everybody's on the same page, and he refers you to his own writings on the subject.
And just to mention, this sefer comes up with one of my pet peeves. If you see it in before the Avat Shalom, the other edition, sometimes you hear it this way, it's Shemer Emunim HaKadman. Because it's a Hasidic Rebbe, Shemer Emunim. I don't understand why that's not Shemer Emunim HaAchron. This is Shemer Emunim. This is one of the classic works in Kabbalah. You don't make him Shemer Emunim HaKadman. I don't understand where this came from, but okay, just a pet peeve.
Maybe now we know who those other Hasidic Rebbes were.
No, I don't know. Lot 27 is really nice for many listeners. Is a Gvuras Hashem. It's the Moral's commentary. Well, they write here commentary in the Passover Haggadah. That's not exactly. It's on Tzis Mitzrayim, Gvuras Hashem, and this is printed in Moral's lifetime for 1582. Moral prints this, and they write it includes the 3 rare leaves in the back, of the book where he gives a kitzer of the dinim of Pesach and Yain Nesech. So they're included. He says they say that this are rare. And they write here also the renowned Golem of Prague was attributed to him, and I guess that is true. It is attributed. So this is lot 27. Continuing along, there's some other old items. There's a Sefer 15, lot 29 is a Aruch post Inkanabala 1517. By the way, I don't think we mentioned this because there's some Inkanabala items. Inkanabala is pre first century of the printing press, so the 15th century, pre 1500. Here's a Kabbalah work. So they write here, first edition in Kanabala, lot 31, two astrology compositions by the Ibn Ezra. Venice, 1485, with Latin, and its leading bid is $1,800. Someone explained that one to me. Why that seems very low for a 1485 book that looks to be in nice condition. I'm not sure what the story is. Someone that's an expert in this, please reach out and explain what is going on. Lot 32. Then there's a couple of Bamberg Gemaras. This has come up elsewhere on the podcast. Bamberg, the Bamberg Shas, the first classic. There was Sansino before, but this is the first full set, the first classic. So there are some individual volumes. Lot 32 is, as they say, one of the uncommon tractates of Shas, which is true. Masechta Avodah Zarah. And as this is censored, I can plug myself here, Moshe, right? And news that I'm right now actually finishing up a commentary of the Teres Chaim, a critical edition, yes, of the Teres Chaim. Ram Chaim Shor dies in 1632. His commentary on Avodah Zarah with putting back to the first print and the censorship and all that. And Moshe is being the general editor through Machon Ali Zayas that he works for. And by the way, the sponsorships are available for that should be coming out soon in the next couple of weeks and months. You can email me, by the way, on that, svarimchatter@gmail.com. And if you're on the WhatsApp chat, you can WhatsApp me and reach out that way if you're interested in learning more and sponsoring. Anyways, I digress. But back to this. This is very nice. Again, these are not cheap. Starting price at $22,000, but this is really looks like a beautiful copy. Then lot 33 is Edius. Lot 34, again, it's a Bamberg. Lot 34 is Megillah, a Bamberg. And those are less. By the way, I should say the lot 33 and 34 start at $15,000. But there is much more money. Then you have lot 35 is a Bamberg Medrash Tehillim. Then there's lot 36 is some Ibn Ezra. Bound together some of his Sfarim on Diktuk. Lot 37 is Ner Mitzvah, Moshe Pizanti. He has some other Sfarim, a commentary on Hashanah, which familiar with. Then there are a number of other items. Again, just trying to run through over here just to mention some. Just skipping around over here. Lot 41 is interesting. It's Tehillah David, Constantinople, 1577. It's Rab David Messer Leon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Messer Leon. Maybe listeners are familiar, maybe not. He was kind of got into a spat with Marik. They lived in the same city. Maybe the Talmidim got into a fight. There's some story about that. He also was famously against the Ralbag. He has a book, Neifes Tufim, that's the father. Lot 42 is Shuvas of the Mizrahi. Lot 44 is interesting, which is Lekach Toiv. And they say there's some handwritten notations here. Constantinople, 1575. So they say single edition. There actually was a facsimile done a number of years ago that had one page at the back of like some information. And on the sides, they actually put the psukim inside of the facsimile. And then there's about 30 years ago, Machon Shuvi Nafshi, we did it. Kind of burying the lead here. This is R Moshe Najara. Recently, there was an episode on the podcast on Rav Yisrael Najara, buried in Gaza, the author of Karibon and many poems, and brand new book, 2 volumes just printed now of his new poetry, She'erit Israel. But this is his father, Lekach Toiv, and R Moshe, have anything to add on this?
Yeah, R Moshe Najara is somewhat of a forgotten figure, although he was also a tremendous personality in his time. He is from that select circle of the Arizal's Talmidim. He marries the daughter of Yisrael Di Kurial, another forgotten figure who at the time, one of the Gedolei Hador in Tzfas. He's from that rarefied era in Tzfas, which is bred Chachamim Muflagim, including R Moshe Najara, a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He spent time in Damascus. He was a Rav there. He himself was not in Gaza, but his son Rabbi Yisrael was. Rabbi Yisrael is famous as a songwriter, although also a prominent rabbi, prominent Talmud Chacham. But Rav Moshe's Sefer, this Sefer Lekach Toiv it might be best described as an early form of Torah Tamima. The point of this Sefer was to bring the Torah Shebal Peh on the psukim. There's a resurgence of interest in such svarim. Avat Shalom recently published the sefer, just the chumash with midrashay chazal, without any notes or anything. There is an interest in that. I think if you have such an interest, you would really love the sefer. Torah Tamim was a very popular sefer. So this is an early form of that sefer where he brings from Mechilta, Safra, Safri, the midrashay chazal. Of course, he brings from the Gemara. He arranges it on the psukim with short biurim, but pshat. It's a pshat sefer. Based completely on showing how Chazal understood the psukim and learning the halachas from the psukim. The Chidah gives it a very warm recommendation. He says this is learning Torah Lishma. You're getting Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, and he says the beautiful name for the sefer is Lekach Tov because it's Lekach Tov Nasati Lachem. He recommends everybody should learn it if they can. Ashrei Adam Hasheket Al Dal. So it's a beautiful sefer. If you can't afford this rare copy. I do recommend you buying the Shuvi Nafshi copy and looking through it. It's a wonderful sefer.
Which I'm not sure if the Shuvi Nafshi one is in print. I found it in Capital Svarim a number of years ago. But yes, this is a really fascinating item. Jumping ahead, Lot 51 is interesting. 1680 Amsterdam, rare Chamish Chumshi Torah with Megillas and Haftarahs. Says it's signed by Rechiel Foa, the son-in-law of Rami, the brother-in-law of Rami, finally they say. But it's got beautiful color pictures throughout. Really beautiful looking volume. Lot 52 is a Siddur of Yaakov Emden, 2 parts. It's a start price of $6,000. And that, as they say, and maybe that's because the title says Segula book. I'm not sure. Is this a Segula that we don't know about? Yaakov Emden is a classic. Yaakov Emden Siddur Emudei Shemayim, one of the classic Siddurim. But I'm not sure where Segula book comes from. It looks to be in really nice condition as well.
I would venture that its value as a Segula is not as great as its value as an excellent purchase and an excellent addition to anyone's library. The Yavitz, full of color, full of life, full of halacha, full of Gemara, Baal b'mikra b'mishno b'Gemara, and his siddur is a classic Sheba classic. This he printed himself on his own printing press. Almost every single perhaps siddur went through his hands. It was him who pushing the print with the help of his helpers, but he was the one who actually produced this sefer. The print can sometimes be a little hard to read, and the Yavitz is complicated, hard to navigate, but very well worth it. It's an excellent addition to anyone's library.
Yeah, the printing press in his basement. So he was printing, and that's your back of them. There's a couple of really lot 63 is a Shari Tzion from Pisa, 1799. It's like a beautiful copy. It looks like leather, like it's a stamp, like some really nice, just pretty volumes here. Lot 64, Ein Yaakov. It was as they say, magnificent, impressive set. And it's got some beautiful binding with red and yellow. It's like different things going on. You'd have to, see it. Lot 65, that miniature, it looks like leather bound. Machzerim for Yom Roim. Same with lot 66. They have a riff that's leather bound. These are just really pretty items. So there's that's interesting, just very interesting. Now, again, flying along over here, trying to. Lot 70 is Luchas Edis. That's the polemical work from the Rabbeinu and Eibeshitz and Rabbi Yaakov Emden fight. We discussed that in a previous episode, so we're not going to get into that. Lot 71 is a Marsha print on Masechtas Nida, Prague, 1602, during his lifetime of the Marsha. That's an interesting item. That's lot 71. I have a friend who told me he likes Svarim that are printed in the lifetime of the author, which is an interesting thing. So that is something like that. Then there is Tiferes. Lot 74 is Tiferes Yisrael, Megillah Sefer. It's on various things. This is by the Rashbash, the son of the Tashbats. That's an interesting thing. Now, lot 75 is an interesting item. Lot 75 is Salonika 1601. It's called Masa Melech, and it's a book authored by Rabbi Yosef Ibn Ezra. And I don't know that he has any relation to Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra or Moshe Ibn Ezra, but who he was, he's famous in the yeshiva world, and not even the yeshiva world, he's famous in the world for his classic on Kedushin, one of the most classics from Atzmis Yosef on Kedushin. But this is the other book that he printed. He printed 2 books, Atzmis Yosef and Masa Melech. And Masa Melech is a book on taxes and taxation. It's an interesting book, and it's not something that's really dealt with very much in Shulchan Aruch. It's not dealt with at all. And he wrote an entire book on this. And there actually was a new edition put out by Professor Yaakov Shmuel Spiegel. This was done 30, 40 years ago. And he printed the Adar of Nisim at the same time as he put together collected from manuscripts, Chuvas, Responsa from him. And there's a he has a bio on Rabbi Yosef ibn Ezra in the Chuvas, and he talks about this work in the introduction to the Masa Melech. He talks about this Masa Melech.
Just to give the readers some background, the laws of taxes and taxation are not how to file your taxes with the IRS, but the laws of taxes are, again, it's a forgotten area of halacha because we don't live in Jewish kehilas anymore. But at the time when the kehila, when Jewish communities were run by a board, what is the authority of the board in levying taxes, which were demanded by the government? What's their authority in governance and other areas that relate to their judicial authority? A very important halachic area, but again, not one that was explored previously. So this sefer in its time was an essential work of halacha for the area that it addresses, which speaks very much to the historical realities of the time.
And Rabbi Yosef ibn Ezra, to explain again, this is printed in 1601 in Salonika. He's a Talmud of the Marashdam. Shmuel de Modena was a Talmud of Rabbi Yosef Teichak, I believe. So he's the generation or so, a little bit after the Beis Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef Karo. He's printing this, and it's really a classic. And it's actually a question which Professor Spiegel addresses: why this was never redone until his edition. Again, Yad Rav Nisim, it was never redone. He says maybe because the classic work, Knesset Gdoila, quotes a lot of it just word for word, and then a lot of Rabbanim used it, but it's not always quoted. Some were using it, some were quoting it, some were looking for it. And again, this is something that was important. And as Rav Moshe said, it's not how to pay your taxes, but it's on those kind of taxes with communities. And he actually has two parts. One is with the Jewish communities and dealing with the government. He also talks, again, they were all interconnected. The community, meaning paying. What I mean is paying the community the taxes that they needed, and then paying your communal taxes that they would tax the Jewish community. The government would tax the Jewish community. So not, again, paying the IRS like you would have now. So that is lot 75, and it's a nice copy, leading bid of $600. Again, leading bid, start price is better. Leading bid, we're recording this now. It could even change by the time this recording comes out, and this podcast will be up after the auction. So if listeners are, but again, I'll just say what it is so you can get some sort of understanding for what's going on. Lot 78 is, again, Segula book. It's a Nefesh HaChaim, first edition, 1824. Is it a Segula? It's the first edition of Nefesh HaChaim, of Chaim Volozhiner, which is a classic. So that's, lot 78. A couple of others. Lot 80 it's not the first edition. It's Sefer HaMafayer by Shlomo Molcho, Rabbi Shlomo Molcho, as they write. They call him Rabbi Shlomo Molcho. Shlomo Chavivi, as he's referred to by Rabbi Yosef Karo in Magid Meisharim, or Sefer HaMagid, as Avat Shalom put back. Lot 82 is the Chafetz Hashem of the Ar Chaim HaKadosh, 1732. I was telling Rav Moshe that the Ar Chaim HaKadosh is very well known for Ar Chaim. Maybe to some extent retire, but I feel like Chafetz Hashem and Rishon LeZion, he's not so well known. They're not so well known, but I could be wrong.
Although on his Matzeva, the Sfarim are not, Ar Chaim is not the first one that they mentioned. They mentioned Rishon LeZion comes before that. So a very important sefer from the Ar Chaim, definitely.
Yeah, because it says here that it's the first book he published at 36, and Chafetz Hashem is on Shas, I believe. So a lot 83, as we mentioned, is Venice 1523, Rekanati, not Recanti, but as listeners may be familiar with it, Kabbalistic commentary of Menachem Rekanati, one of the Italian Rishonim. Al Torah, this is a beautiful first edition, leading bid of $8,000. I'm just giving the leading bids again, just to give you like a feel of what price range we're talking about, because I'm saying years and things have different price range. Lot 84 is the Psakim Uksavim from the Chumas Hadeshin, set 1546. Believe this might be the first edition. I know Chumas Hadeshin I think may have been before, but they say it's a second edition together and it's printed separately. So that's that. Then jumping along to Lot 86, which is a really cool book, and this is Sefer HaTishbi, 1541. It's the first edition, and it's a complete copy. And Sefer HaTishbi is Rabbi Yoel Bacher, Elijah Levita, noted grammarian, and he also was an author. He wrote the Bava Buch.
The original Bava Meisa.
Yeah, is him. He wrote Yiddish literature, and he was famous, again, for his diktuk. And he has a lot of books, Sefer Tishbi and Metorgamon, and there's many works, and Zichron Aaron's been redoing some of them. But this one is the Tishbi, and it has the Hebrew on one side, on the right side, and on the left page has the Latin translation. It's a Hebrew and Latin edition. So, Rav Moshe, turn over to you.
This is the Latin part of the Sefer is the work of of his benefactor. He was about 70 years old already at the time, with quite a reputation already as a leading grammarian, a leading Bible expert, leading dictic expert, a humanitarian, a Renaissance man, and he's brought into. There was a very big interest on behalf of the Christians, in the Christian Hebraists, an interest in learning original Hebrew, and they were publishing their Sfarim, their books, often with the intent of missionary purposes, but they were writing in Hebrew, corresponding in Hebrew, and so this he was brought in there. He was brought to Izny, which is in Bavaria. He crossed the Alps from Italy, where he had been, to Bavaria, and he lived on the largesse of this bishop, Paulus Fagius. Paulus Fagius set up this printing press to publish his own works and other works of grammar that were of interest to him. Now, it's been noted that the Bachur had to answer for his for the sin of teaching Torah to Gentiles. It was not looked favorably upon, and he had to answer for that, which he did. He did defend himself, but he never did have to answer for helping helping this bishop push his own his works with a missionary agenda. And I'll give you an example. In the Sefer HaTishbi, with this edition, actually, on Hebrew Books, you can find an edition with just the Hebrew without the Latin. And in there, if you look at the end of Ois Yud in the entry for Yeshu, it's actually seasonal now. People, there's an interest in looking at the rabbinical attitude towards Yeshu. So if you look at Yeshu there, it's a paragraph of where the name comes from, different theories about it, how the Gentiles pronounce it, how the Jews pronounce it, and that's where it ends in the Hebrew only edition that I saw in Hebrew Books. However, in the edition, the Hebrew and Latin edition, there is an addition in the edition, and the edition starts in Hebrew. It reads like this: Vani hamatik, and it's written in Hebrew by this Paulus Fagius. He calls himself Vagius. Ani hamatik falis Vagius l'chvoid mishichenu v'goy aleinu. He's going to say so, and he's going to quote from Josephus. There's a contested passage in Josephus about Yeshu. Some scholars say it is original, others say it's not original, but he quotes it at length in the Hebrew side and again in the Latin side. So there was a purpose for this. That's Paulus's purpose. Now, they enjoyed a very nice relationship, even though Eliyahu Bachur, the editor, general editor of these works, had to know, he had to be aware of some of the intentions of this Paulus, but nevertheless, he appreciated Paulius. He felt Paulus was a just and honorable person, to the point where he says, just like we Jews say about the Rambam, Moshe v'ad Moshe lekam k'Moshe, he says the Christians should say, from Paul to Paul, none arose like Paul. And that line has been censored out in some of the later European editions of Sefer HaTishbi, but that was his estimation of the man. There's a very curious tidbit I saw. There's one of the works of this Fagius. One of the works is a missionary, an out and out missionary work on the Christian faith called Sefer Emunah or Emunah or something like that. And at the end of all his works, including this one here on auction, there is a stamp with a tree, and this is the emblem of Paulus Fagius. And there's missionary content adorning the stamp. And it refers to his deity as the Mashiach HaNishlach sent, with a ches. In the Sefer Emunah, it's Nishlach with a chaf, Nishlach, Avegivorfen, thrown away. The person who brought this to my attention was of the opinion that was the work of Eliyahu Bachur, the Tishbi, kind of interjecting his opinion. I think it's more likely that was this. I'm going to be Darish L'Gnai and say that the Sefer Emunah was a Sefer that he didn't touch, and therefore Paulus misspelled the word, with his limited knowledge of Hebrew. And the other emblems do bear the imprint of the editing of Eliyahu Bachur, but why should we Darish L'Gnai if we don't have to? But anyway, this is a very controversial person, this Fagius, and the relationship that the Tishbi has with him is also controversial. But I should note, I don't think it's noted here in the description, but the Pri Megadim, no one less than the Pri Megadim, was a very big fan of the Sefer HaTishbi. He says everybody should get used to Sefer HaTishbi, give you an understanding of the Hebrew language and of diktuk. It's a very important Sefer. You should learn with children. He highly, highly recommends it, and that's worth it. That recommendation is worth its weight in gold. There are newer editions. There's a beautiful edition from Mechon Rav Matzliach with notes, scholarly notes from collected from all throughout history, including Rabbi Mazuz's own notes. It's a really a very important, worthwhile, seminal sefer.
Yeah, it's real classic, and I think it's included also in the Zichron Aaron. They did Metorgamon and Seres HaMesorah and a lot of his other works. Again, he's many Gedolim were very pro him. There's a Memra B'Shem the Goin that he was held of the old Bacher. There's in the Zichron Aaron they reprinted in there I think the bio on him by Buber. So Buber is in there. And again, this is lot 86, and this is the leading bid is $1,100. This is the complete edition. I did reach out to confirm if it has this part about Yeshu. It seemingly they didn't know offhand, but it should, because this is the complete edition. This is the Latin and Hebrew edition, so it should have it. And again, in the first part, he says Yeshu, Yeshu, and he goes through the whole thing, and again, it goes through different pieces. That's what the Sefer does. And then it has Vani Amatik. So it's really a fascinating little quirk of the work, besides for the importance of the Tishbi generally, just how important the Tishbi was. And Elio Bacher, as you mentioned, Ramesh, he had, he taught, he had a patron, he would be under a patron and he would work. That's how they would work in Italy, generally Renaissance Italy. And he was under Cardinal Guido, I think David Terbo first. And one of his books, I don't remember offhand which one, he defends himself by saying how he, don't get on me that I was working for this cardinal, and he mentioned someone else. So I don't remember if it was Moshe Kravitz who worked on the Sforno, or someone else was said on the podcast or told me that he's referring to the Sforno, who the Sforno, Ravadia Sforno, was the teacher of Johannes Reuchlin, the noted Christian Hebraist, who ended up saving the Gemara later on in Germany. But again, that's how kind of he was defending himself.
One thing that I remember from, I think that was the podcast with Rabbi Kravitz. One thing that stood out to me is we don't have any direct interaction on record between the Seforno and the Bachur, and the very astute point was brought up at the time that the Seforno was one of the leading Chachamim of the Gedolei Hadar, while this Renaissance man, as interesting and as fascinating, and even as scholarly as he was, didn't really move in the same circles as the Seforno. That was an interesting point.
Yeah, so that is lot 86. That's lot 86. Then there's a couple of, we'll skim again and just mention. Now there's a copy of Rasil Malach from Salonika of 1843, a pretty late one. Lot 91 is a Sefer Karnaim, second edition, not a first edition. Lot 93 is a Chavetz Chaim, and this is the first edition. So this is Vilna 1873, the anonymous edition. The starting price of $1,800. This is the first. You see a lot of the Chavetz Chaims with the Muga coming up. This doesn't have Muga, but this is the first edition. Lot 94, they have a copy of the Chavetz Chaim's Chedushei Rabbeinu Yoina on Sanhedrin with some marginal notes of his. That's lot 94.
I should point out that the Chavetz Chaim was, he's known for, he didn't believe in buying a lot of Sforim. If he could use one in the shul, he got from the shul. He didn't believe in spending too much money on possessions that will outlive you. He felt that the money should be better spent. But so it's later on in the auction, there's a lot of Sforim for him. Can you guess? There's not going to be a lot of Sforim hitting the market that were part of the Chavetz Chaim's library. So this is it's a rare item.
Right. You see a lot of his own Sforim that he printed, that he wrote, which Muga in them, or some notes in there, corrections, but actual Sforim that he owned is different. Lot 95 is the last will and testament, as they say, or Tzava, of Alexander Ziskind of Horodna, which is the Yeshed V'Sherish Avoda. This is the first edition, 1794. Printed in Rodna. Lot 96, for those interested in Yiddish, there's some other Yiddish items that we skipped, but Lot 96 is the first Chumash printed in Yiddish, Cremona 1560, which is a nice item if you're interested in that. Lot 97 is interesting. It's a Torah Nevi'im Uksum, Amsterdam 1700. It has a signature of Rabbi David Nunez Torres, who we didn't know, but if you look, he was the editor, and so it's his name and it's his copy that he actually has. Lot 98 has one of these, what's interesting about it, it's a Machzer from Rome, 1757, but it has a silver binding. You see these on these old books sometimes, even from 30, 40 years, 50 years ago, it come up these old, I don't know if they're actually still look alike, but this is actually a silver binding. So then this is the Taj Art catalog, and they do have art. Now, not art, or they have more like Judaica. There's some candlesticks and Besamim, a spice tower. There's they call it a Hanukkah lamp. They actually don't call it a menorah because I guess it's not a menorah. There's a couple of menorah. The next one's a menorah though, so I don't know. There's a menorah in here. There's some other things. But what's interesting here, again, these are all, if you're interested in this is, not art expertise. They're not Sfarim. There's some more modern kind of art or Judaica, if you will. But there's an interesting item here is lot 119. They call it a museum piece in Indian Jewish community. It's a Torah. It looks like it comes with the scroll, but it's kind of a case. It's in the Sephardic, the standing ones, not the regular. And it's Calcutta, India, 1903.
Now you call that the Sephardic ones. It's an interesting study. The difference between Ashkenazi Sifrei Torah and Sephardi Sifrei Torah. Today it's commonly called the Sephardi one, the Ashkenazi one, although that wasn't always the case. It's been explored recently. The Shurin 25 has an article from a reprint from Rabbi David Tzvi Hillman, an investigation on the topic. Rabbi Yoina Merzbach in the Alayona, he has an article on the topic as well, but it's I don't think it's been conclusively proven exactly when and where and how the different kind of Sifrei Torah came about. But there's references that go either way in the Gemara. For example, you have Matzil and Esat Torah and the tick of the Sefer Torah in Shabbos. It talks about a case of the Sefer Torah, so that sounds like it's a Sefer Torah in a case, much like like this exhibit 119, which has a standing case. Although others have said that maybe in the little box where it's kept, not necessarily that's a permanent box, a case for the Sefer Torah. There's a famous Gemara Megillah which talks about the Goylol after the Kriyas Torah, the Goylol is Neitel Schar Kulam. That has been understood to mean to mirror the Ashkenazi, the now Ashkenazi custom of doing Hagba and Glila after Kriyas Torah versus the Sfardim who do it before. So that would rolling a Sefer Torah indicates that it was not stuck in a case. But mitzad sheni, you have the Rabbeinu Hananel's pshat, and the Rambam who understands that the goyel means the person who takes the last aliyah, and he's the one who closes the case. He's the last aliyah, the mashlim. So it's not clear. The reference in the Gemara go either way. There's indications that I think it's safe to call it Ashkenazi Torah. You can call that Ashkenazi. I don't think there's any record of an Ashkenazi community north of a European Ashkenazi community which had a standing case like is common among the Sephardim. But the Sephardi one, it's a misnomer to call it a Sephardi one because the Western Sephardim, as far as the European Sephardim, apparently did not, such as the Turkish Sephardim, the original Spanish Sephardim did not necessarily have it. Some did, some didn't. It's not clear. It does seem that it was more in the older part of the world where that was common.
Okay, I mean, nowadays it's associated with the Sephardim. Lot 122, it says a rare and early Jewish portrait, photograph from the 19th century, and they say this is perhaps the first Jewish photograph, certainly one of the earliest. And I guess it's Jewish, it's many because he got payas, he has a beard, I don't know how else you would tell, and just an interesting kind of item. Lot 123 is interesting because it's a Mizrach, and this is from Germany or Alsace. This is in the German-French border area, and it's a Mizrach. They would hang it on the wall, showing the Mizrach. And what's interesting about it is it's beautiful. It's like kind of got color, and there's a description as Mizrach, and there's a coat of arms of the House of, I believe it's let me just confirm, it's the House of Bourbon. I think the Royal House of Bourbon, when they regained control from Napoleon. Now, I guess with the new Napoleon movies back in the news, so to speak. When is Napoleon not, though? But what's interesting about this is that it's got Moshe on one side, Aaron on the other side, and Moshe's got horns. He literally has horns. He's holding the luchas with a pointer. Aaron's on the other side, all dressed up the Kohen Gadol, but Moshe has horns coming out of his head like an ox.
It's often thought that the horns was a Christian, artistic piece, an adaptation of the Karne, or that the Pasuk talks about. But maybe it was a Christian, but it definitely did seep into the Jewish consciousness as well. And this Mizrach is clearly the work of Jewish artists or for the Jewish patrons. And there you go, Moshe with the horns.
Yeah, which is unique. It's a really nice item. It's a leading bid of $1,500 to give an idea of what it is. Lot 124 is they're not going to get some letters and different things, but it's all, kind of mixed up. Is a telegram from the chief rabbin of Israel proclaiming a day of fasting and prayer for the victims of the Holocaust. This is March 18, 1944. Lot 126, if someone's interested in this, collection of leaflets and supplements of the anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer. So if you want some Nazi ephemera, I don't know, That's what lot 126 is. Lot 127 is a memorial book, a pincus of the Chaver Kadisha, the Padua community, and included in this pincus is mention of the Ramat Valley, Moshe David Valley, the kind of Rebbe Talmud, Rebbe Chaver Talmud, all three of the Ramchal, and he actually a lot of his writings, he has tons of writing. I don't think any was ever published in his lifetime, but now it's been published by Rabbi Spinner, and some now as Machon HaOitzer has been doing. So he's got a whole Tanakh and other things, and kind of Kabbalistic, some very interesting things. Lot 128 is a prayer for the recovery of the Empress Maria Theresa from smallpox. This is interesting. This is by the community of Mantua. Obviously, it's famous, the Hesped of the Noda B'Yehuda on Maria Theresa, printed in Drush Noda B'Yehuda. Shirley Bornstein did a big raid bite on that. That's kind of a famous one. Then there's some Hasidic Sfarim, Slavita, Zhitomer, not my forte. I don't know if it's yours either. So there's a number of Hasidic stuff, but I do want to get to. We've kind of waited. We have to get to what, in my opinion, and maybe is the most interesting item in the auction. It's buried at the end. Let's mention lot 141 is a letter about appointing Rebbe Chaim Sonnenfeld to the rabbinate of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim. It's actually a letter. It's signed by many Rabbanim, and you can actually read the letter. That really was his appointment.
This appointment is in 1919, which is a long time after the position was vacated. 10 years after it was vacated, with the death of Reb Shmuel Salant, the previous Rav of Yerushalayim, and it's obviously very political. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, the Gdolei Olam, but he was from Hungary. And the Yerushalayim of that time was very, very, people were very territorial. They had the Koil Ungarin, the Hungarian Koil, which means the Hungarian emigres would get their sustenance from from money raised in Hungary. And then there's the Koil Litan, and the other Jews were predominantly Lithuanians of the Ashkenazi community, that is, predominantly Lithuanians, and they would have their own monetary distribution. And when Reb Shmuel Salant died, Shmuel was the Rav of the Koil Prussian, which was again mostly based Lithuanian. So the best candidate was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, but they didn't appoint him. They felt it was they couldn't reach across the aisle and appoint a Hungarian like Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, despite the fact that he had been there for a very long time and was close to the Maral Diskin, and he was just an outstanding candidate. But they couldn't appoint him, and therefore the position was vacant for about 10 years. It's only in 1919, after Rav Kook was appointed as the Rav of Yerushalayim, then this faction realized they better get their act together, and then they finally united under Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. This is signed by many names here, some very famous names. These are the Salta Shamna of the Prushim of what you might call the Badatz section of Yerushalayim, but it's a very fascinating historical document.
Then lot 142 is a manuscript in the handwriting of the Ramaz. We mentioned him earlier, Moshe Zakuto, when he came up with the Eitz Hadas discussion. The leading bid on this is $48,000. It's really fascinating to see. Lot 143 is Drashas that they say is unknown from the Ben Ish Chai. This is also an interesting item. You do see Ben Ish Chai items come up at auction. Again, they're saying this is different because they're saying that this comes up from his period, he says, after he leaves period of isolation.
I'd say there's another unique feature of this one is very often you have smaller pages, which apparently were part of a larger notebook, but they were split up and sold in split up for auction to be sold in smaller pieces. So you don't have the whole entire notebook, but here you have 60 pages. This is a very significant portion of the Ben Ish Chai's drushes. Definitely a very unique item.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the isolation means, but it just means like he's thinking. I don't know if that's actually what that means. Then there's Sansan Layoyer. This is lot 144. This is a book of the Chida, and they're saying that there's handwritten corrections of the Chida. And there's also a Siddur of the Chida, which is lot 145, with some comments. So again, there's, first of all, as you can tell, I hope, from just us mentioning various things, this auction is chock full of amazing items. Really, just fascinating to look at. Again, either if you're interested in bidding on it, or if you just want to see it, if you just want to talk about it, really fascinating. Lot 147 is a base of Irgas. There is a manuscript from his. So we didn't look into this. We just looked at it, and they're saying that it's in his handwriting. I'd be curious to know more about that. It's absolutely beautiful handwriting. It looks like it's printed to publish or printed by a copyist. But that's lot 147, a start price of $7,000. Lot 148 is a leaf. If you want an 800-year-old leaf, a leaf being one page of the Rambam commentary on Mishnah Torah, this is 800 years old from 1222, just one page. Lot 149, I had mentioned it in Kanabala, so a 15th century item. This is a 1486 Nevi'im Achronim with commentary of the Radak. This is Sensino, 1486. The start price is $20,000. So just going back to my earlier comment, the earlier item with Ibn Ezra, why that was 1800. I mean, in Kanabala, $20,000 is what it should be. It's an Kanabala. I mean, these are, from just any print, Jewish or non-Jewish, these are just a fortune. Lot 150 is a manuscript from 600 years old. It's a pre-expulsion. This is a leading bid of $60,000. I guess so. Those are fantastically expensive items, just fantastic items. Some other manuscripts. And then we get to lot 152, which I think is the most fascinating item here. And we'll try to convey that. I know we've gone long already, but I want to convey that to the listeners, but why this is so interesting. Lot 152 is a complete it's not complete, we'll get this. It's a manuscript of the Sefer Ibn Shanim Tikkun Yisachar of Rabbi Yisachar Ibn Susan or Ibn Shushan. Tzfas, who is he? Let's get into that, Rabbi Yisachar. Who is Rabbi Yisachar Ibn Shushan? What is this Tikkun Yisachar? It's not Kabbalah, probably thinking Tikkun Klali. It's not that. It's setting up the calendar. It's part of, and I can read from Professor Elisheva Kalbach's wonderful book. I'll read some of it, Palaces of Time, Jewish Calendar and Culture in Early Modern Europe, where she talks about these Sifrei Evronot, Sefer Ibr, and this was calendar culture. We didn't have iPhones and Android and the internet, and you'd have your calendar and you can have Maizmanim and you could check things up. It's not how it was, and this was a very important part of Jewish history. And he's living at the time in Eretz Yisrael. This is at the time of Yosef Karo. So this is kind of the golden age of Tzfas, is who we're talking about. And just one more thing, I shall say, the Sefer, by the way, has been printed, and there's a new edition that came out recently, but this is a fascinating discovery for many reasons, and I'll give it to you, Moshe, and then I'll say some more about him after.
Yeah, I'll start with the background. Tzfas at the time is an ingathering of Kibbutz Goliath, and again, it's the pinnacle of Torah scholarship in the world at the time. Torah, Nigla, Nister, Hasidus, Precious, everything Tzfas is the world's capital for Torah learning. And in Tzfas you have an Ashkenazic presence, and you have two Sephardic presence, and this will come later in a bit. You'll understand where I'm going with this. But there's the Sephardim. There's the after Girush Sfarad, the Spanish exiles, they encountered Jews in other lands, so they gave them names. The Jews who lived under Christian, the original inhabitants of lands that were under Christian rule, they referred to as Romans, because of the Eastern Roman Empire. They were called them the Romaniotes. That's how you have a Minig Roima, the Nusach Roima in Italy, for example. That's where that term comes from. And then you have in the Jews in the Arabic lands, because they resemble Arabs, they're called the Mistaravim. The Arabic Jews, that's what they call them. And you have these two communities. You have the Spanish community, which they speak different languages, by the way. In like where the Beis Yosef, in the Beis Yosef Yeshiva, they spoke a Ladino, they spoke a Spanish. And there's a sister community there with their own dayan, their own Rosh Yeshiva, and that's the Mistaravim community, where they speak Arabic. So Rabbi Yisachar is he himself is from Morocco, the Maghreb, and he's Arabic speaking. So he joins that community, but he's a great Talmud Chacham, and there's a lot of interaction in the communities. They daven separately, and Rabbi Yisachar mentions that. He mentions how the communities would daven their own nusach, they would conform to their own traditions, but they learned in the same yeshivas. They all submitted to the authority of the Beis Yosef at the time. He was the Gadol Hador there, so they lived harmoniously, but they had different minhagim, and that will feature in a bit. But Nachi, first go ahead and tell us what you know from this book.
So first of all, this is lot 152. Again, right now there's a leading bid of $25,000. And I think this makes sense, actually, I think. This is a manuscript of his with corrections and additions. I should just get to it and not beat around the bush. So this is, and we'll talk about how amazing this is and what a discovery this is. And they actually included a lengthy article put out for this item from the scholar Yosef Avivi. But so, as I mentioned, Professor Kalbach does bring down a fair bit of this in her book, which, by the way, beautifully produced book with color images throughout. It's a wonderful read. It's a pleasure to read. I highly recommend this book just if you're interested in reading it. And I'm not someone that's interested in calendars and numbers, but it's not what it's about. It talks about calendars and print culture and how Jews were interacting with calendars and time and how it was important and why it was important. It's a really interesting book. So on page 51, she's first talking about earlier editions of earlier kind of calendars. Evronot, let's call it, or Evronus, I guess. She talking about Tikkun Yisachar of him. And it was printed early on. And she, again, as R Moshe said, he came from Africa and he goes to Eretz Yisrael. And he's a Talmud of the Ralbach, or Levi Ibn Chaviv, the famous, the one who kind of argued on the Smicha. And he has the Kunshas Smicha in his Chuvas that Marie Beirav talked about. And he says here, he talks about that he gets into, I'm going to read from her book. You can read this in Tikkun Yisachar, but here just has the English translation and it just flows. That he says in his book, the Ibn Shushan, as a result of my wandering, it was difficult to concentrate on texts, so I occupied myself by reviewing the mathematical formulae related to the Ibr to take my mind off my travels. And so he was trying to justify why he was doing this. And again, he traveled around. I believe the community sent him out to collect money, to be like a shadar, so he would go all around. Now, he also says that in 1539, a controversy erupted of when the Shemitah was. When was Shemitah? He says he went through Rambam and Ishtori Aparchi, Kaftu Aferach, and he said that it was Shemitah. Now then he gets to a sad issue that arose. And he said that he gave the manuscript in those days. I mean, it still happens today. You give your manuscript to a press like Ali Zayas to do the work. But he gave the manuscript to an editor proofreader responsible for preparing it for the printer and shepherding it through publication. This does not appear to have expedited the process because the book did not appear in print until 1564, almost a quarter century later. When at long last he saw his book in print, because you would send your book away, and he lived in Eretz Yisrael, says he was not happy, to say the least. Shlomo ben Binyamin Rei, or it's Rei, Strechel Yud, but Rei, the man to whom he had entrusted the job, had positioned his own name prominently on the title page and buried the author's name in small print on the bottom of the page. And as Professor Kabach says, Rei's precise role is difficult to ascertain. But this was only the beginning of Rei's misdeeds. Far from eradicating errors, Ibn Susan charged that Rei had taken many liberties with his original manuscript. In particular, the manuscript had been recopied 2 or 3 times without my knowledge from my original. The printed book appeared to have been based on an inferior manuscript copy, and in the course of the unauthorized copying, Ibn Susan complained, many errors had crept into the first printing. Quote, he omitted diverse items from various parts of the book, he ignored some of my insertions and deletions, and throughout the entire book he omitted to prepare tables as well as the circles for the tkufot. He included only the 100-year charts, and Del Rey wrote his own name on them, although he did not compose them. He printed that edition in a money-saving mode, and while I cannot blame him for what he omitted, I blame him for what he added of his own or of others, conjunctions, months, and the turn of the seasons. These are the years for which he erred. Therefore, I have seen fit to add here in the second edition an appendix on the Tkufot with true precision. And what happened was, Ibn Shushan brought a new edition to print, a second edition. He corrected and edited the work himself, correcting it. So, usually we hear with Sfarim, you want the Tfus Rishon. The Tfus Rishon here is worthless. You don't want the Tfus Rishon. As well as telling us, is terrible. So, if you would see at auction the second edition, that's the one you would want in general. Not the first edition, or maybe for the oddity. You don't want that one. And he went through it. And again, he printed years. He prints the tables. There's tables in there of charts. You see this printed Sfarim until, past today. He goes on till the year 6000. He says, to the end of the world, he's going to print tables on it. He wants people to see it. And he corrects it, and he writes, and because of this sloppiness, he charges this Rei, all those who rely on the errors that these printers have perpetuated are eating leavened bread on Passover and consume their heart's delights on Yom Kippur. So they're mamish overing to make people over Isser Deraisa. Terrible thing. This is not stam. People in those days didn't have calendars. This was their Google Calendar. It's a horrible thing that they did, and he's furious. And he says, he continues and he talks about how they printed it. The printers themselves testify regarding their own work that letters can easily be exchanged with others as they quickly separate them, each letter in its own box, and they do this with all the letters. So again, I'll skip this. He explains how they basically were working in the printing press. And he goes on, and there's really a lot there. But the other part that's to mention here why he also prepared it. He said that when he was traveling, in some of the places I passed through in my travels, people beseeched me to provide for them a tikkun, which means a fixed calendar chart that would last for many years. And this is up on page 58 in Professor Kalbach's book. For they said that they did not know how to search the Sifrei Ibr that are found among us to find a particular year, unless they are told the kfiyut, set formulaic number, according to the chronology of creation, or according to some other chronology, such as the minyan shtaris, era of contracts. For they have no luchos, which are tables, that arrange this for them. They have asked me to prepare a book on this subject and to inscribe tables in it. Therefore, my book contains tables from 5299, which is 1539, through the year 6000, the end of the world, a total of 702 years. I have provided tables and rules for the tkufas as well to track them until the end of time. And we'll get to tkufas. There's a new year and kind of lunar eclipse and different things that we can discuss what luchas are and his opinion that he gives on luchas. But I'm just reading snippets of this. And again, you can see the new edition, just to mention, of the Tikkun Yisachar was put out a few years ago by R Moshe. It's called. It's a green volume. It's put out 4 years ago. And they're very nicely done. There's an introduction, different things. Now, as we'll discuss, it seems like you need a new edition now. But Ramesha, back to you about this item. Now that we've kind of explained what this Tikkun Yisachar is, and I think it's quoted even in Shulchan Aruch, it's quoted in Beis Yosef. It's I mean, really super important about calendars. It's quoted in all the Paiskim. And again, he's one of these, Gedolim at the time, in the time of Yosef Karo in Eretz Yisrael. And let's talk about this item here, this manuscript in auction.
Now, besides for the calendar aspect of the Sefer, it has another very important feature, and that is the minhagim that is associated with the calendar, the passage of time. It's like a shul manual of the Kriyas Torah. It's very famous for what you lane when, and that is the subject of one of the most amazing parts of this manuscript. This is the edition that was sent, was copied and sent off to print. But Rabbi Yisachar kept this edition and continued to make changes. He made changes after it was sent to print. So not all the changes are reflected in the printed edition. There's still more, marginalia and other additions that he had written in notes and corrections that were not included in the final edition. So this is an extremely important sefer just for that alone. But there's an amazing historical discovery here as well, and that surrounds one of the issues taken up by the sefer, and that is, what is the proper laning for communities in Eretz Yisrael that keep only 1 day of Yom Tov versus the communities in Chutz La'aretz that keep 2 days of Yom Tov when Pesach falls out on Shabbos. So when Pesach falls out on Shabbos, so in Eretz Yisrael the following Shabbos is not Pesach anymore, but in Chutz La'aretz it still is. It's the Achron Shel Pesach, and as such they don't lane Parsha Shmini, they lane the Pesach laning. So when do they catch up? They have to catch up with Eretz Yisrael laning two parshas together, and Chutz La'aretz. I'm making a mistake. It has to do where in Eretz Yisrael they would split the parshas, and Chutz La'aretz would catch up by combining the parshas. So which parsha does that happen was a matter of dispute between the two congregations, two Sephardic congregations in Tzfas, with the Beis Yosef's, the Spanish community doing it one way, and this Mistaravi community doing it the other way. And Rabbi Yisachar adds in a margin here. He adds in a fascinating episode where he says he was shown an original sefer they dated to 1390, an ancient manuscript sefer which supported the way they did it in the Mistaravi community. And he says this sefer was brought to the Beis Yosef on his deathbed, a few weeks before he died. The sefer was brought to Beis Yosef. Now we don't have this. This is a testimony that does not exist anywhere else, and it's in the hand of Rabbi Yisachar, the author of this sefer, Tikkun Yisachar. And he says the sefer from 1390, from a Kadmon, dealing with this exact issue, was brought to the Beis Yosef, and the Beis Yosef saw that his psak was not in conformity with this ancient sefer. And really, the Mistaravim had it right, and the Beis Yosef was so bothered by the fact that his psak wasn't in line with the sefer, that it says he put his 2 fingers in his mouth and he bit his fingers in frustration. And he said, Halavai, I wish I have the opportunity to right this wrong. But sadly, says Rabbi Yisachar, he did not have the opportunity, and he passed away before Pesach of that year. So he never got to change his opinion on it. So this is an outstanding discovery, an Eidus Mikli Rishon on the Beis Yosef, which we would never have anywhere else. So it's a real historical treasure. And this item is accompanied with a 12-page write-up by Rabbi Yosef Avivi, definitely an authority on these matters. He examined this manuscript, and he informs us that there's pages missing in this manuscript which are to be found in a manuscript held in a museum in Cairo. Together, they make up a full, complete sefer. So they're really, this sefer hopefully falls into the hands of someone that wants to see it brought out to light. There's also additional biographical information in the back of Sfarim in the olden days. That's where they'd keep a register of births and deaths in the family. So we learn a lot about Rabbi Yisachar from the information that he penned in the back of the sefer, in firsthand, in his own hand. We now know more about him himself and his children and where he lived. So it's an amazingly important discovery. And like I said, I hope this does find its way to the hands of somebody that wants to see it published in a new edition where we finally have the full, complete seminal work by Rabbi Yisachar.
Yeah, some Sfarim you hope that they will go to a library or, like you're saying, a private individual that would allow others to use it because it's really important. Interesting, you mentioned the Minhagim. He's one of the first that mentions eating fruit on Tu B'Shvat. People think this is like something that was going on for thousands of years, but this is not really the case. And he says, Yom Tesvav Boy in Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Lilanes, the Noyagim HaAshkenazim, Laharbis Boy Bimine Peres. The Ashkenazim used to have a lot of fruit. Ilanes, the Chavish Shmoy Shel Yom. And he says later on, it seems like, and the new edition says, it seems like Sfardim didn't do this. This was an Ashkenazi thing. We know the whole thing doesn't come from Chemdes Yamim, is it Sabbatean, etc. And one more thing I would mention, going back to Professor Kalbach's book, where he talks about the Tkufa, and there's a lot of the Sephardic Gedolim kind of downplayed it and poo-pooed it and said, this is silly, this is kind of old wives' tale, this is just superstition. And he says, no. And he says, I, orphan of orphans, least of the least among the disciples, have difficulty with the words of Rav Hai Gaon of blessed memory. If he is correct that the Tkuva practice was merely symbolic of the new season, why did the people not also refrain from drinking water on the new year, which is the essence of the whole year? They should have been required to do so at least at the beginning of the day or at night at the first meal, as it is customary to do, during the Tkufa not to drink water even during a meal. The same question applies to the 3 other new years throughout the year. According to the words of those Gaonim of blessed memory, who say that the early sages said these things merely to frighten the masses, this is a great puzzlement. For even the sages of the Talmud and the Kabbalists have suffered this, he says, the harmful effects of the Tkufa, over many generations since ancient times. All of them have had this frightening voice in their ears, cautious and warning others, sages and plain folk, with proclamations in their synagogues, their communities, and among the peoples. If the matter seemed inherently unclear, would our predecessors not have had some other way to frighten the masses to fear God except for this way? Perhaps with these things they continually preach in their sermons and exaggerate for them? If those blandishments did not cause people to fear God, how much less will they listen because someone tells them, whoever drinks water during the Tkufa will be harmed? This does not lead to fear of God, not a lot and not a little. Furthermore, one can wonder at the word of Avraham ibn Ezra, blessed memory, who wrote, the matter of the swelling up is the prattle of old women, as it is impossible that this fear has become known and spread throughout the world for no reason. Even the books of codifiers and Kabbalists of blessed memory contain written evidence of this fear. And he was, upset about this. He didn't, and this is something that he talks about. And if you want to hear more about the Tkufa, you can read extensively in Professor Kalbach's book, again, Palaces of Time. And this is chapter, just to find you the exact chapter that talks about the Tkufa, is chapter 7, which is quite interesting. So, and then there's tons more in Tikkun Yisachar. Again, you can find the new edition still in the source. So this is Lot 152, that is that. And then, again, there's a lot more. There's still 210 lots. Lot 155 is autograph of a Karaite responsa regarding the laws of kosher shechita according to the Karaites, if that is your interest. There's a bunch of number of other items. Again, of course, just trying to see what else to mention here. There's an Amsterdam Zohar that they say has the notes and corrections of the Kabbalist Rav Shalom Buzaglo. He's the author of the Mikdash Melech, the commentary on the Zohar. So they say this is his notes. There's various other manuscripts and a siddur belonging to there's a siddur and various other items here. I know we've run kind of long. There's a manuscript 169 pages in the hand of Yehuda Fataya, which is interesting. There's this manuscript of an autographed manuscript of Avi Ezri by Rav Shach. This is 171, and I'm just going to throw out price just so you can understand the price range we're talking about. That's right now is a bit of $1,400. There's leaf, so a page of Chidushim from Leo Gutmacher, the tzaddik of Grodis. What is he referred to? The miracle worker.
He was a Lithuanian miracle worker, and he was treated like a rebbe, although he was a Litvish Goyen, a Talmud Kveger. But it didn't matter. Everybody would line up for his bracha just like they would any other Hasidic tzaddik.
Yeah.
This there's a number of items in this auction. We mentioned the Ben Ish Chai, which has 60 pages of unpublished chidushim. There's a number of such just carrying over the theme that I mentioned with the Tikkun Yisachar, where I hope that these things see the light of day. There's a lot of such items in this auction. There's 17 pages of the Aderes. That's lot 173 chidushim Aderes. There's a very big interest in his chidushim, and those never been published. You have a sefer from Reb Chaim Yeluz. This is Reb Yosef, should be Reb Yosef Chaim Yeluz, one of the last pre-mandatory Palestine Rabbanim of Tveria. A full sefer on Chumash, which is either his or it's his father's. To me, it looks like it's an older handwriting. And they say, I think it maybe is, he owned the sefer, probably maybe one of his ancestors, Sfarim. There's a sefer from Avram Shag, the Rebbe of the aforementioned Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, one of the greatest Goenim of his time. A full sefer. There's a lot of Torah here, which I hope is pursued and purchased and eventually sees the light of day.
Lot 178 is Yam Shel Shleima that belonged to the Chavaz Yoyer, Ruchaim Bakrak, Prague 1616. And again, you mentioned the other stuff. And there's Chuvas from Moshe Feinstein, Lot 81, Lot 182. There's a response of Moshe Feinstein. There's Farm of Ruchaim Kanievsky, his copy of Chiddushei Mikveh Eger, that's 1,000. There's start price at 1,000, Lot 184. Sorry for the confusion. There's Sefer Tehillim signed by Tovia Weiss. There's some other manuscripts. And again, there's just so much here, and we've gone so long already. We're trying to get through just to mention some of these items. Some Kabbalah books, some letters. There's some letters from the Yeshiva of Lublin. There's a very interesting letter from the Chafetz Chaim, lot 198. It's a letter about the Manchester Shechita polemic. This is lot 198 as a bid of $8,000 right now.
Yeah, maybe one of the last letters they say signed by the Chafetz Chaim is in the last few months of his life, so it's a very rare item as well.
Yeah, and there's again a number of other letters. There's lot 201 is interesting. It's cute. It's a start price of $800. It hasn't been bid on. It's a letter from Chamovad Yosef, and it's a biography. He's going through his life. I was here. I was there. I went here. This is he literally recounts his life, what he went to. It seems like it was written for maybe a government purpose or something.
It reads like a CV. It's signed just Ayin Yosef. It does seem to be an official letter, but it's got all the dates and it's in his handwriting. It's a fantastic little piece.
Lot 204, there's a letter of Rav Kook. Lot 202, going backwards, of some letters of Rabbi Chaim Sonnenfeld. Lot 205 is a letter appeal for money, Rabbi Chaim Grodzinski. And then there's a letter in 206 from Rav Shapira, Rav Shivan Volozhin. I mean, there's just endless stuff. Lot 207 is a notebook of Chidushei Torah Moshe Finkel, the son of the Altav Slobodka. And there's lot 208 is 15 leaves. So again, number of pages with Chidushim from, and Amorim, they say this again, just Torah from the Mechta Milio. So there's a number of letters and a number of other things in here. And then we jumped around and we tried to mention different things in the auction. There's tons here. We went very long. I know it was a long episode this week, but just to do it justice, to try to talk about some of these interesting things. Again, this episode was sponsored by Taj Art. Thank you to them for sponsoring it. But full disclosure, they did sponsor this episode. But as always, I wanted to make sure that the listeners found interesting information here. Whether you're interested in bidding on some of these items, please go register with Taj Art. We'll link in the show's notes. Bid on some of these items. Check out these items. But even if you're not, if it's something that you're not interested, you don't buy antiques or you can't afford it, still worthwhile to check it out and to look at these treasures. A lot of these letters you can read in its entirety. They put it up, the entire letter. Sometimes the auction houses cross out or blur it out. A lot of these letters are there in its entirety. You can read it. You can check it out. Really fascinating, and I would advise listeners to do so and to check it out.
Definitely well worth checking out the pictures of these lots, because they're high quality images, and sometimes you can get more seeing a picture you couldn't get otherwise. For example, there's one of the earlier lots which we had to pass by due to time constraints. There was a letter written to the community in Modena on behalf of the Yeshiva of the Or Chaim in 1766. But you can see that. So first of all, it looks like you've seen these. If you read Avram Yari's Shluch Eretz Yisrael, you've seen such letters where it's in a fancy calligraphy signed by all the Chachmei HaYeshiva in the Sephardic, very colorful signatures. So you have that there. But in addition to that, they show you the pictures of the back of the paper, the reverse of the paper where it's addressed. You can see how it was even folded up and delivered to its to the community leaders in modern Italy. It gives you a feel for the for how this star was actually used instead of just seeing a facsimile of it. So it's very well worth your while. A very colorful auction. Lots and lots of historical information can be gleaned from these all these different lots, and very important items full of Torah, full of Jewish history, full of the lives of tzaddikim that appear to us in their own handwriting very often. Definitely an amazing experience to be able to go through this and participate in this.
Yeah, I will mention that you mentioned the Ram Shag. That's lot 177. And there's also Drushas Harush, it's called. I don't know why they called it a rush, but that was printed by Zichron Aaron from him. And lot we did skip, lot 180 might be of interest. Not super expensive. It's a bit of $800. Is the Child Shuvas Ar HaMeir of Rameir Shapiro, Rosh Yeshiva in
the Rav and Rosh Yeshiva in Lublin,
and Chacham Lublin, and his Davi Safir recently wrote a massive bio in the Mishpacha. And this is a handwritten dedication and signature of Rameir Shapiro on the title page. And again, not super expensive. Someone's interested in that type of thing. It's lot 180. So check it out. And again, many items. We've gone long, but there's a lot to discuss. Thank you to Taj Art again for sponsoring. Hopefully you found this interesting. Again, for the feedback I've gotten from the previous ones is that people enjoy this. They enjoyed us just talking about history and items and antiques and things like that. If you enjoy it, let me know. Email me, sfarmchatter@gmail.com, on the WhatsApp chat, WhatsApp me, on Twitter, comment, however. And thank you, R Moshe, for joining me once again. And hopefully for the listeners, I know this was long. Hopefully you enjoy it and you have as much fun as we did researching this and discussing this.
Thank you very much, Naki, and thanks to Taj, and I thank you for the platform, and I wish your entire audience all the best.